Do you need to make a custom door jamb like this one? I'm going to show you how. I picked up a couple of plain doors a little bit ago, and because they are not pre-hung, I need to make a custom door jamb. The three main parts to a door jamb are the two jamb legs and then a jamb header. For the material, generally in the States, you're going to use 1x material, and then you're typically going to need something 6 inches wide that you cut down to the width of your opening. Most of the time, you can find something in the store that is already the width that you need and that generally already has a rabbet cut into it. When I was looking, the common boards were $13, and I could buy a whole jamb leg for $15 for only $2 more. Plus, the common boards were all warped. So I really needed to go up to premium, which was $22 because lumber is just insane right now. In my case, I'm going to do French doors and they're extra wide. So I just bought 3 legs and I'm going to use one of the legs. I'm going to cut it down and use it as my header. Now, if you need to cut a rabbet into your material, you want that to be the depth down of the thickness of your material. So around 3/4 of an inch or 18 millimeters, depending on what you have. And then you also want to make that go in about half the way through the thickness of your material. You can do that with a router or with just a little saw. Before we start cutting things down, we need to choose what is the gap that we want on the top, sides, and bottom of the doors. In my case, I'm going to go for 3 millimeters. It's about 1/8 of an inch, and that's pretty standard to have that reveal at the top and the sides. The bottom is generally 1/2 an inch or around 12 millimeters. You're going to want to check though that your floor is flat. If you have your floor not flat, so put a level there so you can measure, and you're going to need to add that to whichever side is lower than the other one. So you have sort of your minimum is going to be say 1/2 an inch, and then if it's 1/4 inch off, then the gap on that side is going to be 3/4. You really want that header flat, or else you can have problems with the door being hung properly. For getting the width across, what I like to do is put a spacer in there. I 3D printed these spacers. I'll have a link down in the description below. And then you can just take your 2 pieces of legs or your jamb legs, put them on either side with the gap in there, put a clamp on there, and then measure across the rabbet. That's going to give you the most accurate way of getting that measurement without having to do a bunch of mathematics. In my case, since I have French doors, I'm going to need to put the 2 doors side by side. I've got another spacer that goes in between the 2 doors, and then I'll do the same thing and measure across to get my header in that way. For figuring out how long to cut the legs, you need to measure off the rabbet, not the top of the piece, but the rabbet, and you're going to want to add your reveal at the bottom and the top to the length of the door. So in my case, I've got a bottom reveal of 12 millimeters, top reveal of 3 millimeters, so I'm going to add 15 millimeters to the total length of the door, measure that down from the gap, and I'm going to cut both of mine to the same because my floor is flat. Now we need to cut out the slots for the hinges, and that's really, I think, the toughest part of making a door jamb. I want to come down on my door around 250 millimeters for the top of my top hinge. One nice thing, if you did cut the rabbets, in addition to being a little bit stronger, you can measure off the rabbet, and then you just add that same distance plus the gap. For me, 3 millimeters, so I'm going to measure down off the top of the jamb 253 millimeters, and that'll match up to the 250 that's on the door, leaving me that 3 millimeter gap. There's 2 main hinge shapes. There's the squared off or rectangular ones, and then the rounded corner ones. If you have a chisel and that's about it, then you're going to want to go with the square ones because it's a lot easier to get into these corners with a chisel than trying to make a round part with a chisel. For the square hinges, get a sharp blade, and when you have this in the right place, cut around about a 1/16 deep around the edge. Do this in shallow passes so you don't accidentally slip off into the grain of the wood. And then after that, you can kind of pound down a little bit on the edges and cut out the rest with your chisel. For the round corner hinges, you're really going to want some sort of a jig to use with a router. I 3D printed a jig so that I could have nice tight fitting. I have a generic one already, but it leaves the mortises a little bit loose. I have a link for this down in the description. It's parametric in Fusion 360, so you can make your mortises exactly to the hinges that you have on hand. You just want to put your jig in place, and then you can put your router down so it's touching on this plastic piece. And then just turn on the router and use your pattern bit to move all around, hog out that material, and your hinges should fit perfectly. I use this large full-size Bosch router with a 1/2 inch collet for the flush trim bit. I like this because it's stable, but it's traditional to use a trim router with a smaller bit. I just like the bigger one. I find that it's more stable. Also, I'm going to be putting out a long-term review on this router. Make sure you subscribe so you can see that. After your mortises are cut, I like to put the hinge in place, use a self-centering drill bit to drill some pilot holes, and then actually screw in the screws beforehand. It's just gonna make, when it's time to install the door, go a lot easier. If you make door jambs a different way, I really wanna know. Put it down in the comments so that I can learn from that and everyone else can too. Before I screw on the jam head, I made sure to do a sanity check of putting on the hinges on the jam legs and on the doors to make sure that everything aligned and I didn't have any problems with the hinges. Doing the jam header isn't too tough. I like to take the doors off of the jam legs that I screwed on previously to check. Then I'm gonna pre-drill for 4 screws along the top in the center of the rabbet. Then you can run a bead of glue along that rabbet, take your jam head, put it in there and just run those 4 screws in on both sides and your door jam is done. I've got the doors in place. I decided to take it off of the jam so it'd be lighter to transport in here, but then it was kind of tricky to put it back together. I had to get my beautiful wife to come help me, so I wish I would have just left it together and dealt with the more heaviness of it. Now, to get it into place, I used some shims all the way along it. I did have to put some extra blocks up top just because there was a lot of room above the header. Now, one trick that I've found over time that I like to do is I'll take the stop material and I'll mark that on the side so that I know what's going to get covered in the future. That way, when I'm moving stuff around, I can use screws to pull out the door jam and then I can use shims to push it in so I can get that reveal nice and consistent all the way around the door. The last piece of the door jam is to put in the door stop. Put a clamp or screw in a block so that the door can't swing out. Then what you can do is push up against that and you can take your door stop, place it against the back side of the door. After installing the door stop, you can use a flush trim saw to trim off all of those shims on there. Then your door jam is done and installed. To finish everything up, we installed some custom trim, which you can find out how to make in this video. And then we also painted everything to make it look nice. Thanks so much for watching and take care.